In this video, we're going to review section 3.1, scatter plots and correlation. Chapter 3 is all about relationships between data or different variables. Chapter 2 was about univariate data, and in Chapter 3 we're going to talk more about bivariate data. We have more than one variable and how to measure relationships, whether one variable causes a difference in another one. And specifically in section 3.1, we're going to talk about how to display that relationship or lack thereof and how to measure it. We're going to start with defining variables. So you're going to be able to identify explanatory and response variable in situations where one variable helps to explain or influence the other. Then we're going to go through and make a scatter plot to display the relationship between two quantitative variables. We'll talk more about how to do that in the calculator or with computer software. First, let's define explanatory and response variables. These may look familiar to you after you write out the definitions as independent and dependent variables. The explanatory variable is always going to appear on the x-axis. This is very similar to your independent variable. And an explanatory variable is the root word explanatory, explain. It may help to explain or predict changes in a response variable. So how well is it explaining what's changing in the response variable? Like I said before, it's also referred to as an independent variable. Your response variable measures the outcome of a study. This always appears in your y-axis. This is just like your dependent variable. And you're measuring outcome, could be effectiveness, and you're judging your explanatory variable, how well does it actually influence the response variable. Let's run through a quick example and identify what the explanatory and response variable are in this example. So this talks about coral reefs. How sensitive to changes in water temperature are coral reefs? To find out, measure the growth of coral reefs in aquariums where the water temperature is controlled at different levels. Growth is measured by weighing the coral before and after the experiment. So we identify the explanatory variable and the response variable. If you want to quickly go through and identify each one, response variable, personally, I think is a little bit easier to identify. It's a thing that you're actually measuring to see what changed. And in this case, the last sentence, it says growth is measured by weighing the coral before and after the experiment. That's what you want to find out. What's actually changing there, and the growth is what's changing. So response variable is going to be growth measured by the weight. So growth of coral measured by the weight. Now, what is changing? It's possible that there is no change, and we find out that there is no relationship between the water temperature and the growth. That's totally okay. It's just what's possible to change. The explanatory variable is essentially what's going to possibly explain the changes in the response variable. So what are you controlling? And that word controlling, used right here, controlled at different levels. This is the water temperature. You're tinkering with the water temperature, and then you're measuring the growth. So whatever you're tinkering with and controlling in the beginning is the explanatory variable. So that's changes in the water temperature. So you think about the scientific method where you make a hypothesis. Someone might say, or ask a question. You might say, do changes in water temperature affect growth measurements of coral reefs. And that first part, the hypothesis of the question, that's the explanatory part. If I change this, if I make changes or control this first thing, changes in temperature, does the second thing, growth of the coral, actually have is a relationship there? Displaying the relationship between two variables. This is what's called bivariate data, the prefix bi, bicycle, two wheels, two variables, bivariate data. The most common graph is called a scatter plot, where the variables are quantitative. This is very important. When you have a scatter plot, it's two number lines, x and y axis. They have to be quantitative variables. Your x-axis will always contain the explanatory, and the y-axis will always contain the response variable. So just like independent and dependent, x-axis is your independent and your y-axis is independent. Sorry, your y-axis is dependent. Your x-axis is explanatory and your y-axis is the response variable. Each data value is a point. So between your bivariate data, if you look at that point, it represents two numbers, one on the x and one on the y. As is with any graphs, make sure you have a title, labeled axes, and the same width between tick marks. All very important things with any graph. Title, obviously telling what your audience, what you're measuring. Label axes, what's the unit that you're using, and then same width between tick marks. If you didn't have this, your graphs, or the next thing we talk about here with scatter plots, be very difficult to ascertain what the direction, form, and strength of scatter plots are. So these are three standards you got to go through when you make your scatter plots. All right, so next, I can describe the direction, form, and strength of a relationship displayed in a scatter plot and identify outliers in a scatter plot. So, univariate data from Chapter 2, shape, center, spread, were the three things you had to look at for describing a graph. Bivariate data has three different things. It's direction, form, and strength. So direction is going to be your overall pattern. Form is it linear or not? And I put for now because there's going to be other types of form. But we're just strictly sticking to, is it linear, yes or no? And then if it's no, it's something else. We're not going to worry about it. If it's linear, yes, we're going to investigate it further. And then finally, strength. Do all the points follow a clear form? Are there any potential outliers? Are there clear deviations from the pattern? Is it really tightly bound into a line pattern, or is it kind of spread out like a buckshot? Does it not have any relationship whatsoever? That's your strength portion. Direction, is it moving up to the right? Is it down to the right? Positive, negative? So that's that first part, direction. Positive association, negative association. It's one or the other. Your graph is increasing from left to right. So like in algebra class, it looks like this, a line. That's just a line, not an actual scatter plot. Lower than average values from both variables go together, and higher than average values from both variables go together. So essentially means when you actually have your scatter plot, it looks something like this, where you have your x and your y, and it's in the same quadrants, creating that positive association. Negative association goes the other way, in quotes. It goes down or decreasing left to right. Lower than average values from one variable go with above average values from the other variable, and vice versa. So this one looks like this. It has that decreasing look to it. So some examples here. We have three different scatter plots. Direction, form, and strength for all of them. Direction first. Let's go through the three. Direction. This one, it goes down, left to right. This one's going to be a negative association. Down, left to right is a negative. The second one, direction. Not as strong, it looks like. We haven't got to that yet. But it's going up from left to right. That's going to be a positive association. The third one, direction. This is also a positive association. It is going up from left to right. Let's draw that arrow like that. Form. Remember, this is going to be linear or nonlinear, and that's it. Okay? This one, it looks pretty linear. There's no curvature in there at all. That's obvious. So this one we're going to just say it's a linear form. The second one, again, it's not close to a line. It's kind of, it's less strong than the first one, but yes, it is still linear. We don't see any curvature. The third one, this one's a little bit more obvious for, certain reasons for you're first learning this stuff. That's a curve there, and there's it's pretty obvious that there's a curve there and it's not linear. So we're going to say this is non-linear. We're not going to go into is it exponential, is it a polynomial, any of those things. We're simply going to say non-linear. Strength, how close is it to being a line? Could someone mistake it for being a line, or is it pretty spread out far apart? This first one, the strength, you could say this one's fairly strong. Is it perfect? No. They're rarely going to be perfect. But do these match up to what a line would look like? Yeah, none of them are that far from a best fit line that we'll talk about soon. So we're going to say fairly strong. And it, you could probably say this one's strong. If you're not certain which one it is, strong or weak, somewhere in between, you could use words like moderate or fairly to help you out there. The next one, the strength. This one is weak. It's not, you could say fairly weak here. Without the actual correlation number, we don't really know for sure. But it's definitely weaker than the one to the left. The strength for the third one, even though it's not linear, we can still say that it's strong. It follows a clear pattern. There's a curvature here that's pretty obvious. It's still a strong strength there. So those three things, direction, form, strength. Look for direction, positive and negative association, or none. Form, linear, nonlinear. That's all we're doing for right now. And then, strength, how strong is it? How close are the points overall to the actual best fit line? So, in this video, we talked about the two types of variables, explanatory and response. Those are very similar to your independent, dependent variable. They go on your x and y axis respectively. We talked about an example, how to look for explanatory and response variables. We reviewed what a scatter plot should have on it, title, axes, same width between tick marks. The big three when it comes to looking at scatter plot, what to actually describe it by: direction, form, strength. Remember that direction is going to be your overall pattern. Is it positive or negative association? Form, for right now, linear or not, or linear or not linear. And then strength, is there a clear form? Keep an eye out for potential outliers. If there are outliers, you may want to mention that in your description. And then clear deviation from the pattern. We'll continue in the next video with the correlation coefficient, the equation, and the possible numbers you can get for it and how they look graphically.